Thank you, Ibuka. I'd like to start by thanking you all for this important event. Thank you for sharing it with me, and I'd like to congratulate you all for this major achievement. I'm truly humbled to be standing here today. I know things weren't always easy for most of you, so be proud of what you've accomplished and optimistic as you look forward toward the next phase of your lives. As I look at this group, I too feel optimism at your accomplishments as well as Nexford University's, particularly for how far this university has come in under 4 years and how it's helped prepare you with the tools to compete globally. The future is truly global, and all of you and the African continent will certainly play a major role in the future of our planet. But today, as you share this special day with me, I'd like to share some of my experience-based views of what the future will hold for all of us. And the better prepared you are for the future, the better your chances of success are going to be. In the future, the most successful people will be those who embrace the fact that one's physical location, gender, and even race should no longer determine whether you can move ahead in your career. As you all know, the world has changed tremendously over the last few years, including how we learn and work. Remote work and learning has become a major part of our world. So those of us who embrace this new paradigm will be better positioned for success. Perhaps the most important shift of remote work is the platform it gives each of us to tell our stories to the largest audience possible. This audience is no longer limited to your physical location. Think about how profound that change is. As remote work continues to grow in importance, mastery of the art of storytelling will be a vital skill in your professional journey. We all have a story to tell. How well you tell your own story will determine how well people will listen to it. But telling your story in this new remote work paradigm will only be possible if you have plenty of perseverance, or grit, as our American friends like to call it. As you face obstacles and challenges throughout your lives, you'll find just how important grit is and how it, along with your newly developed storytelling skills, will truly benefit you during this paradigm shift. Let's start with the global grid that we often talk about at Nexford. Many of you will have heard me mention this term, global grid, and I'm a big fan of it. As Nexford graduates, you know firsthand how important remote work and learning has become in the modern society. The global grid is becoming a reality. It is a reality today. You will either be on the grid or you will be left behind. In the future, the most successful people will be those who acknowledge, embrace, and leverage the global grid to its potential. And that's a good thing. The trend of online and remote work has been the catalyst behind Nexford's mission from day one. It's why we launched Nexford back in 2019. And it's what will propel the university and all of you to new heights in the future. And believe me, this trend will only gain more momentum over time. The COVID pandemic played a major role in the online work from home trend becoming more widespread and permanent in the case of many positions and companies across the world. But other factors will also accelerate the remote work trend. Some of you may be wondering, why am I so confident about this reality of the grid? After all, it's not something we can actually see physically, and yet it's all around us. So to answer this question, I want you to consider that Africa has the world's youngest population. Western and more developed markets across the world are going to face an aging population over the coming decades. These are facts, not opinions. Across many Western markets, population growth is actually declining. Elon Musk refers to world population collapse as the biggest challenge facing civilization. Fortunately, you don't need to worry about that challenge here in Nigeria. The surplus of young population in nations like Nigeria is a sub-trend within this greater remote trend all of you here today are positioned to take advantage of. As the populations of these Western nations retire from the workforce, they will need to find qualified individuals to fill a range of positions across different fields. Even today, despite the current harsh economic climate around the world, there are actually millions more job vacancies than unemployed people in the US today. Eventually, many of these positions will be filled, if not by citizens, then by young people such as yourselves with the skills and background who happen to be in another country. Remote work will now provide you with the opportunity to move ahead in your careers without needing to move from your beloved country. Immigration will become an option, no longer a necessity. As more positions go remote, your experience here at Nexford will give you a head start against your competition. But as you utilize your background, skills, and education to get a leg up in the new paradigm of remote work, it's important you know how to tell your story. I can't stress enough the importance of storytelling, selling yourself in a way that's engaging, that's important, and that's authentic. I'm a fellow African, despite the color of my skin. So I understand many of the challenges you all have faced. Egyptian born and raised, I've lived in the US and the UK and all over the world. I've realized that if there's one skill that most successful people across the world have mastered, no matter their backgrounds, it is the art of storytelling. And when it comes down to it, effective storytelling can really have a leveling effect, especially today given the global grid. In fact, storytelling is even more important today with the grid, because you have a global platform to tell your story regardless of your location. As I look around this room today, I see plenty of talent. I know for a fact that Nigeria has an entire population of talented young people ready to compete with people in Europe, Asia, and North America. But in order for you all to effectively compete against those other people, you'll have to learn to pitch yourselves. You'll have to learn the art of storytelling. I'll tell you from experience, you may just be as talented as people or another person in London, England, or in Austin, Texas, but those successful people in England and the US have one key advantage. It's how to communicate effectively, and especially how to pitch themselves. Telling a story about your life and selling it to others may seem simple enough to people across the world, but I know from personal experience that there are cultural and institutional barriers to those. Most schools across emerging markets don't teach effective communication, which is the art of storytelling. This gap can be clearly seen years later across interviews and when there's a chance for promotions. The reality is, though, this cultural barrier will need to be overcome to find success in the global market. If you nurture and develop your storytelling, I guarantee it will eventually pay great dividends. It will take some patience and perseverance to do this, which brings me to my final point. The last thing I'd like to talk about today is perhaps the most important, because it makes everything else possible. It is grit. Grit is just a neat, concise, and very American way of saying perseverance. This word is in many ways part of the American culture and character. It's come to symbolize the idea of hard work and determination. Although the term grit may be American, it's something us Africans might have even been born with. You all have it. I'd like to share a brief story when I first started Nexford 4 years ago. It really epitomizes, I think, the concept of grit. My co-founder and I managed to get this call with an investor, this highly reputed investor back in California in 2018. The call lasted 5 minutes. The investor said, starting university is just impossible. He said you'd be lucky if you get $20,000 in investments. And actually, he didn't even wait for a comment. He hung up afterwards. 5 minutes max. Next day, we had a meeting with an online education expert in Stanford. We'd heard that he was interested in starting what he called a disruptive university. I'm going to refer to him as Dr. PK today. He took the meeting while on his treadmill. He was actually walking on his treadmill. He continued walking during the meeting. 15 minutes into the meeting, he concluded that, no one would fund this idea. It's not going to work. American investors aren't going to invest in this. And then he increased the speed on his treadmill, towards 15 minutes, sort of signaling to us it's time to leave the room. So we walked out. A few days later, we met with this well-reputed law firm in DC, in Washington. They told us we could apply for a university license, but we should give it 3 to 5 years. It's not going to happen any faster than that. Anything less would just be unrealistic. What could we do? Many of us could have called it quits, but we didn't. We brainstormed. Most importantly, we summoned our inner grit, and here we are 4 years later. Instead of 20,000, we've raised over 20 million. Instead of getting licensed in 5 years, we got licensed in 1. Most importantly, we're here today with you guys. We've impacted the lives of people all across the world. I'll always remember conversations like this one, and the lessons they've taught me in grit and perseverance. After living in the UK and the US for a while, I learned that this idea of grit actually has cultural and institutional support. Let's be real for a moment. In markets like the US, for example, where substantial safety nets exist, innovation and hard work are definitely encouraged. However, if you don't make it, there are other options that are usually going to support you, right? You're going to have your basic needs met. But most of you know the unfortunate reality is that isn't necessarily the case in Nigeria, and many other markets for that matter. It's often a case of who you know more than what you know, or how hard you work, which means you have to work that much harder and that much smarter. For all the hard work you put to move 10 steps forward in a market like the US or the UK, you'll only move 5 in Nigeria. You just have to work, that much harder. But as true as that situation has been in the past, you are all in a unique position. That just wasn't the case 10 years ago. Again, because of the global grid. You're no longer tied to your physical location. The global grid will allow you to work remotely, anytime, anywhere, for an employer in California or in Texas, or to sell customers in Texas from your home in Nigeria if you're an entrepreneur and want to build a startup here. I know from experience that although grit may be an American word, there's plenty of it in the African continent. There's plenty of it in this room. You actually need grit to get through basics of life in Nigeria every day. It's not easy. You already have it in your DNA, and you've demonstrated it by being here today. I don't know if you guys know this, but you are among the world's top 10% of most educated folks. Less than 10% of the world has a college degree. You should be proud. What's more incredible about your achievement is you've done it under incredibly stressed circumstances caused by the pandemic and other social challenges. By channeling your grit, you overcame many obstacles to become what will likely be our greatest graduating class ever. You'll find that if you get on the global grid, your grit and perseverance will open unlimited opportunities for you. I don't know if you also know this, but Nigerians in the US are on average twice as educated as the national average in the US. A Nigerian American is twice as educated as a Native American. Many of you probably have friends or family there, so you're aware of that. But the strong work ethic and value education is already part of your culture. Now is the time for you to apply your grit in the right place, thinking outside the box and realizing the trends that are sweeping the world. Don't limit yourself. Keep an open mind, keep on learning. And this is really important. It may sound counterintuitive, but by this, I mean don't allow your degree to get in the way of your learning. Think of your degree as a launching pad for future learning. At Nexford, you've learned how to learn. Now it's up to you to apply that learning and to keep on learning. The reality is all successful people have effectively used their grit, but not all successful people are necessarily any smarter or more competent than others like you. In fact, most people in the most senior roles are inherently mediocre, and I mean this with sincere humility. 9 out of 10 times, it is the grit and the hard work that allows them to exceed and excel over others, and their ability to communicate effectively. I'd like to thank you again for allowing me to share this moment with you. Be persistent, show grit, develop your story. The future is global.